The question in the snow.
Have you ever felt like quitting something quietly, without telling anyone, just letting it fade because you are too tired to try again? Maybe it was learning English. Maybe it was your marriage. Maybe it was forgiving someone who never even said sorry. Now imagine this. You are standing by a frozen window in the United States, watching a snowstorm swallow the street outside, and a strange question forms in your mind. When did you last forgive? That was the night I realized the snowstorm might heal my past. I was living and working in America, chasing what many people call the American dream, but I rarely talked about the part no one posts online.
The loneliness.
The pressure.
The shame of not feeling good enough.
By day, I worked hard, smiled politely, and answered emails in careful, simple English. By night, I replayed old memories from years ago, arguments, disappointments, words that hurt more than I admitted. You see, climate changes you. I moved from a warm region to a northern state where winters feel endless. In summer, everything looks hopeful. Blue skies, green parks, neighbors waving. But winter? Winter is honest. It strips the trees bare. It shows you what is left when decoration disappears. That first winter in the US, I felt exactly like those trees. No leaves. No excuses. The snowstorm came in January. Weather reports called it historic. Schools closed. Offices went remote.
Road disappeared under thick white silence.
I remember standing in my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the snow falling sideways. It was beautiful. It was also overwhelming.
That night, the power flickered once.
Just once. But it was enough to make my heart race. Funny how external storms wake up internal ones. Suddenly, I was not just in a snowstorm. I was in my past again, memories of betrayal, unfinished conversations, resentment I carried like invisible luggage across continents. Here is something psychologists often explain in simple terms. The brain does not like unfinished emotional business. When conflict is unresolved, the mind keeps replaying it, trying to solve it. It is like leaving a browser tab open forever. It drains energy in the background. Studies in emotional regulation show that forgiveness reduces stress responses and lowers anxiety because it gives the brain closure. Not because the past changes, but because your relationship to it changes. Standing there, watching the snow pile higher, I asked myself softly, when did you last forgive? Not forgive in theory. Not forgive in a motivational quote.
Truly forgive.
If you are learning English right now and feel stuck, I understand you more than you think. Sometimes we quit because we are not just tired of grammar.
We are tired of feeling small.
Tired of misunderstanding jokes. Tired of translating our hearts before we speak. And that exhaustion mixes with old wounds, making everything heavier. I used to practice English by reading short stories out loud in my living room. Slowly, very slowly, I would say simple sentences like, "The snow is falling. I am afraid. I want peace." Those small sentences were not just language practice. They were emotional practice.
Speaking slowly force honesty.
You cannot hide behind speed. During the storm, I sat down at the table and whispered, "I forgive you." My voice sounded strange in the quiet apartment. I tried again.
I forgive myself.
That one was harder. Forgiveness is not weakness. Neuroscience suggests that when we choose forgiveness, the brain reduces activity in areas linked to anger and threat, and increases activity in regions connected to empathy and reasoning.
In plain English, your nervous system calm down.
Your body stops preparing for a fight that already ended years ago. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something shifted. I thought about my marriage. Living and working in the United States had added pressure, bills, deadlines, cultural differences, expectations about independence and success. Sometimes we argued about small things, but the arguments were never just about dishes or schedules. They were about fear. Fear of failing. Fear of not belonging. Fear of repeating old family patterns. The storm locked us inside that night.
No driving anywhere. No distraction. Just us and the sound of wind hitting the windows.
I realized something uncomfortable. I had been asking my partner to heal wounds they did not create. I expected reassurance for insecurities born long before we met. That is unfair. But it is also human. So I asked myself again, this time more clearly, when did you last forgive? And another question followed, what if this snowstorm is not here to trap you, but to pause you? In America, storms are announced days in advance. People prepare. They buy food, charge devices, check heating systems. But emotional storms? We pretend they will pass on their own. They do not. They wait. That night, I chose to do something small but radical.
I chose to talk.
Slowly.
In simple English.
I said, I am not angry at you.
I am afraid of my past.
It was not poetic. It was not perfect grammar. But it was real. And something about the snow outside felt symbolic. Snow covers everything evenly. It does not choose which roof deserves it more. It gives the city a clean surface, at least for a moment. Forgiveness felt like that, covering old footprints so new ones could begin. If you are watching this and thinking about quitting English, quitting love, quitting hope, pause. Ask yourself the same question that found me in the middle of a historic American snowstorm. When did you last forgive? Because sometimes the storm is not there to destroy you. Sometimes it is there to quiet the noise long enough for you to hear your own voice. And that voice might be ready to say something new.
A New Life in America.
Airports are strange places. They smell like coffee, recycled air, and second chances. The day I landed in the United States to begin my new life, I felt brave for exactly 12 minutes. Then the doubts arrived. They did not shout. They whispered.
Are you ready for this? Is your English good enough?
What if you fail here too?
Starting over in America sounds cinematic when you say it fast.
New country. New job.
New beginning.
But when you live it slowly, the details are heavier. You have to understand accents. You have to decode workplace culture. You have to learn when people mean let's meet soon, and when they actually mean probably never. I moved to a northern state, far from the climate I grew up in. Summers were kind, long daylight, outdoor concerts, neighbors smiling as they walked their dogs. It felt like a movie about fresh starts. I told myself, this is it.
This is your chapter.
Then autumn came, and with it, subtle loneliness. Leaves changed color, beautiful but temporary.
The air grew sharper.
I started my new job in an office where everyone spoke fast, confidently, casually. They used idioms I had never heard before. Someone once said, "Let's circle back," and I literally imagined walking in a circle. I laughed politely. I nodded often. I went home exhausted. There is a psychological concept called cognitive load. It means your brain has limited space to process information. When you live in your native language, you use very little cognitive energy to understand conversations. But in a second language, especially in a fast-paced work environment, your brain works overtime. It translates, predicts, edits, corrects. By 5 p.m., you are not just tired. You are mentally drained. That was my daily reality in America. I wanted to succeed. I wanted to prove that I belonged here, not just legally, but emotionally. Yet every small misunderstanding felt like evidence that I did not. One afternoon, during a team meeting, my manager asked for my opinion. My heart started beating faster than it should have.
He knew what he wanted to say.
I had good ideas, but arranging them in English felt like trying to build a house during a windstorm. By the time I finished my sentence, someone else had already jumped in. After the meeting, I went to the restroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I whispered, "You can do this." It sounded less convincing than I hoped. If you are learning English right now, maybe you know this feeling. It is not about vocabulary. It is about identity. You feel intelligent in your own language. In another language, you feel reduced.
Simple.
Smaller. But here is the paradox. living and working in the United States forced me to grow faster than comfort ever could. American work culture, at least in my experience, values direct communication. People say what they think. They expect you to speak up. Silence can be interpreted as a lack of engagement. That was hard for me. In my past, staying quiet felt safe.
In America, staying quiet felt invisible.
Outside of work, daily life was another lesson. Policies and systems were different. Healthcare forms, tax documents,
Insurance details.
everything required reading carefully, slowly. I remember sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, reading each sentence out loud to practice pronunciation, while also trying to understand what I was signing. It sounds dramatic, but reading a utility bill became part of my English practice. The total amount due is, I would repeat the sentence 3 times, focusing on rhythm. Language learning experts often explain that repetition strengthens neural pathways. The more you repeat a phrase correctly, the more automatic it becomes. So I turned ordinary American life into a classroom. Grocery shopping became vocabulary training. Workplace emails became writing exercises. Casual conversations became listening practice. But underneath all of this productivity, something deeper was happening. The snowstorm from the previous section had already asked me a powerful question about forgiveness. Now, in my daily American routine, I began to see how much of my struggle was not about English at all. It was about fear of not being enough. Imposter syndrome is common among immigrants and international professionals. Research shows that when people enter high-performance environments, especially in a second language, they often underestimate their competence. They attribute success to luck and mistakes to personal failure. That was me. When I made a small grammar mistake, I replayed it all night. When someone praised my work, I thought, they are just being polite. Winter arrived again. This time, I was more prepared. I owned a heavier coat. I understood weather alerts better. I even joked with co-workers about snow forecasts. Small victories. One evening, after work, I walked home through light snowfall. Not a storm.
Juste quelques flaques drifting down.
I noticed something subtle. I was thinking in English. Not perfectly. Not fluently. But naturally. I am tired, I thought. But I am improving. That sentence mattered. Living and working in the United States did not magically solve my insecurities. But it exposed them. It showed me where I was still carrying old narratives from my past, beliefs like you must be perfect to be accepted, or if you struggle, you do not belong. America, with its fast pace and direct style, forced me to confront those beliefs daily. And slowly, through repetition, through mistakes, through simple conversations, I began to build something stronger than fluency. I built resilience. If you are watching this as part of your real English story practice, listen carefully to the rhythm of this journey. It is not dramatic. It is ordinary. And that is the point. Growth rarely feels like fireworks. It feels like showing up again the next morning, answering another email, trying another sentence.
Smiling at another misunderstanding.
A new life in America is not just about opportunity. It is about adaptation. It is about allowing yourself to be a beginner again, even as an adult. And maybe the most important lesson I learned during that first year was this: starting over does not mean erasing your past. It means carrying it differently. The snowstorm asked me about forgiveness. Daily American life asked me about courage. Both questions were preparing me for something I did not yet fully understand. But I was getting closer.
Working, surviving, pretending.
There is a special kind of exhaustion that does not come from hard work. It comes from pretending you are not tired. That was my daily routine during my second winter living and working in the United States. I woke up early, dressed professionally, checked the weather app, and stepped into the cold like it was normal. Inside, I was still negotiating with my past. At the office, everything looked efficient. Clean desks. Scheduled meetings.
Clear deadline. America love structure.
I learned that quickly.
You show up on time. You respect the calendar.
You reply to emails. Simple rules. On paper, I was doing well. But here's the part no performance review measures: how much energy it takes to act confident in a second language while still healing emotional wounds you never fully addressed. I had mastered professional phrases.
Il follow-up.
That makes sense. Let's explore that option. They rolled off my tongue smoothly. What did not roll smoothly were personal truths. I feel insecure. I am afraid of failing again. Those sentences felt heavier. There is research in psychology about emotional suppression. When we constantly hide our real feelings to appear composed, the body experiences stress even if the face looks calm.
Cortisol level rise.
The nervous system stays alert. You may look successful on the outside, but inside, you are bracing for impact. That was me, bracing. At work, I volunteered for projects. I stayed late. I double-checked every document before sending it. If a sentence sounded slightly unclear, I rewrote it 3 times. I told myself it was about professionalism. But if I am honest, it was about fear. Fear that someone would notice my accent. Fear that a grammar mistake would confirm my worst belief, that I did not truly belong in this American workplace. One afternoon, a colleague casually corrected my pronunciation during a presentation. He was not rude. In fact, he smiled. It's pronounced schedule like this, he said, repeating it with an American accent. Everyone nodded and moved on.
Il octe tout.
Thanks, I said. But that night, I replayed the moment again and again. If you are learning English right now, you know this loop.
À small correction, quand feel like a spotlight. Your brain magnifie it.
It becomes evidence. See?
You're still behind.
Neuroscience explains why this happens. The brain is wired to notice threats more than praise. Negative experiences activate stronger emotional responses than positive ones. It is called negativity bias. So even if 10 things go well in your day, one awkward moment can dominate your memory. Now add this to unresolved personal history. Before moving to the United States, I had experienced failure that I never fully processed. Relationships that ended painfully. Professional setbacks. Words that still echoed. Instead of healing them, I packed them mentally and carried them across the ocean. So when something small went wrong at work, it did not just trigger embarrassment. It triggered the old narrative, you are not enough. That is how pretending begins.
You prétends you are confident. You prétends you are not hurt.
You pretend you are not comparing yourself to everyone else in the room. And because America moves fast, there is little time to pause and reflect. The culture rewards productivity. Keep going. Keep achieving. I became very good at surviving. I survived meetings by preparing scripts in advance. I survived social events by memorizing small talk questions. How was your weekend? Any plans for the holidays? I survived performance reviews by focusing on measurable results. But surviving is not the same as living. One evening, after another long day, I stayed late at the office. Snow had started falling again outside the large windows. Not a dramatic storm this time.
Just steady, qui est snow.
The building was almost empty. I looked at my reflection in the glass.
The office lights made the outside look darker.
For a moment, it felt symbolic.
Bright inside.
Dark outside. Or maybe the opposite. I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Who are you trying to impress? The answer was uncomfortable. I was trying to impress a version of myself that did not forgive mistakes. Not just grammar mistakes.
Life mistake.
In American work culture, there is a concept called growth mindset. The belief that skills can improve through effort and learning. Companies encourage it. Leaders talk about it. But applying it emotionally is harder than applying it professionally. It is easier to say, I can improve my English, than to say, I can heal my past. That night, instead of rushing home, I opened a blank document on my computer. I started typing in simple English sentences. I am tired of pretending. I am allowed to learn slowly.
I am not my worst moment.
They were not poetic. They were not complex. But they were honest. Language learning experts often emphasize output, speaking and writing, as essential for fluency. You cannot only consume English.
You must produce it.
I realized something deeper. You cannot only think your feelings. You must express them.
Pretending keeps everything internal.
Expression releases pressure. Over the next weeks, I experimented with small honesty. When I did not understand something in a meeting, I said, "Could you repeat that, please?" The first time, my voice shook. The second time, less. No one judged me. In fact, a colleague once said, "Thanks for asking." I was confused too. That moment shifted something fundamental. My insecurity had convinced me I was alone in confusion. Reality showed me otherwise. Working in America stopped feeling like a performance and started feeling like participation. Yes, I still prepared carefully. Yes, I still cared about doing well. But the pretending slowly decreased. I began separating my identity from my mistakes. If you are watching this real English story practice and feel like you are only surviving your English journey, hear this clearly. Survival is a phase, not a destiny. You are allowed to learn publicly. You are allowed to mispronounce words. You are allowed to grow in front of others. Because pretending may protect your pride temporarily. But honesty builds your future. And I was finally ready to build, not just survive.
Love in slow English.
Love does not always begin with poetry. Sometimes it begins with incorrect verb tenses. I met my partner on a quiet Saturday afternoon in the United States, at a small community event downtown. There was live music, warm coffee, and people pretending not to feel the early winter chill. I remember rehearsing simple English sentences in my head before speaking. "Hi, nice to meet you. How long have you lived here?"
Basique.
Safe.
Manageable.
When we first talked, I spoke slowly. Very slowly. Not because I wanted to sound dramatic, but because I needed time to think. Every sentence passed through a mental filter. Is this correct? Does this make sense? Am I using the right tense?
Romantique. Right?
But here is the surprising truth. Slow English created space for real connection. In fast conversations, people often perform. They interrupt. They impress. They compete for attention. But when you speak slowly, you choose your words carefully.
You listen more. You notice tone. You observe facial expression.
You become present. That afternoon, instead of trying to be impressive, I focused on being clear. "I moved here last year," I said. "I am still learning. I like the snow, but it is difficult."
Simple sentence.
Honest sentences. My partner smiled and replied, "Snow is beautiful, but it can be heavy." That word, heavy, stayed with me. It felt like we were not only talking about weather. Falling in love while living and working in America added another layer of complexity. Cultural expectations are subtle but powerful. In the US, independence is highly valued. People respect personal space. They expect direct communication. If something feels wrong, you are supposed to say it. I was not used to that level of directness in relationships. In the beginning, I worried that my limited vocabulary would make me seem less intelligent, less interesting. Research in social psychology shows that when we communicate in a second language, we often feel emotionally reduced. Our personality seems smaller because we cannot express nuance easily. I felt that reduction deeply. But something unexpected happened. Because my English was simple, my emotions were simple too. I did not use dramatic language. I did not overcomplicate explanations. I said what I meant.
Yeah, I'm happy today.
I feel nervous. I need time. There was clarity in that simplicity. One evening, during our third or fourth date, we walked through a park covered in light snow.
Street light reflected softly on the ground.
I remember thinking how different my life looked compared to a few years earlier.
Différent country.
Different climate.
Différent love story.
I confessed something small but vulnerable. Sometimes I am afraid my English is not enough. My partner stopped walking and looked at me carefully. Your English is fine, they said. But even if it wasn't, I care about what you mean, not how perfect it sounds. That sentence changed something inside me. Linguistic research suggests that communication is only partly about vocabulary. A large percentage of meaning comes from tone, facial expression, and context. In other words, connection is not built on perfect grammar. It is built on emotional honesty. Love in slow English forced me to practice presence. We had misunderstandings, of course. Once, I used a phrase incorrectly and accidentally sounded colder than I intended. Another time, I misunderstood sarcasm and took a joke seriously. We laughed later, but in the moment, I felt embarrassed. Here is where emotional growth intersected with language learning. Instead of pretending everything was fine, I started saying, "I think I misunderstood." Or, "Can you explain that again?" Those simple requests prevented small confusion from turning into big resentment. In previous relationships, I sometimes stayed silent to avoid conflict. Silence felt safe. But silence can build distance. American relationship culture, at least in my experience, encourages open dialogue. It felt uncomfortable at first. Saying "I feel hurt" out loud required courage, especially in a second language. But courage grows through repetition. There is evidence in behavioral psychology that small, repeated actions build confidence faster than one dramatic gesture. So instead of waiting for a perfect romantic moment, we built our relationship through small, consistent conversations. Cooking dinner together became language practice. Grocery shopping became teamwork. Planning weekends became shared decision-making.
We were not just falling in love.
We were building a shared vocabulary. And slowly, the fear that I was not enough softened. One night, during another winter storm, less dramatic than the historic one, but still intense, we sat by the window watching snow cover the street again. I realized something quietly powerful. The same snow that once symbolized isolation now felt peaceful. Love had not erased my past. It had not magically healed old wounds. But it gave me a safe space to confront them. It showed me that vulnerability in simple English was stronger than silence in perfect grammar. If you are practicing English through this story right now, pay attention to the rhythm. Notice how short sentences can carry deep meaning. You do not need advanced vocabulary to express truth.
I care about you.
I am trying. I forgive. These are not complex sentences, but they build complex lives. Love in slow English taught me that fluency is not about speed. It is about connection. And sometimes, the most powerful words are the simplest ones spoken without pretending. Marriage under quiet pressure. Marriage does not usually collapse because of one dramatic event.
It bends slowly.
Quietly. Like a roof carrying too much snow. After the romance of slow English and gentle winter walks, real life settled in. Living and working in the United States meant shared bills, shared schedules, shared stress. Love was still there. But so were responsibilities. Rent. Insurance. Career growth. Long-term plans. In America, stability is often measured in numbers, credit scores, savings accounts, performance reviews.
En number confiluded en feeling.
At first, we told ourselves we were fine. We communicated better than before. We laughed often. We supported each other's goals. But underneath that steady surface, pressure was building. Cultural differences do not disappear after marriage. They become more visible. In the US, independence is deeply valued. Even within marriage, there is an expectation of personal space and individual ambition. Follow your dreams is not just a motivational phrase here. It is a lifestyle. Meanwhile, I carried quieter expectations from my past, ideas about sacrifice, emotional reassurance, unspoken understanding. Those two models of love do not automatically clash, but they require negotiation. One evening, After a long workday, we argued about something small. Dishes in the sink.
Ou forgot to call the internet provider. Minor details.
Yet the conversation escalated quickly. You never listen, I said. That's not fair, my partner replied. The words were simple. The tone was not. Psychologists often explain that couples rarely argue about the surface issue. They argue about what the issue represents. Dishes may represent appreciation. Phone calls may represent responsibility. Tone may represent respect. In that moment, I was not angry about dishes. I was afraid of being unseen. Living in a second language adds another layer to marital conflict. When emotions are strong, vocabulary shrinks. You search for words while your heart is racing. Sometimes you choose the wrong phrase, not because you mean harm, but because your brain is overloaded. Research on emotional arousal shows that when we feel threatened or misunderstood, the rational part of the brain becomes less active. It is harder to think clearly, harder to speak gently. Now imagine doing that in your second language. That night, I said something sharper than I intended. My partner responded defensively. Silence followed.
Et vit silence.
And silence in marriage is dangerous. Silence allows stories to grow unchecked. They don't care. I always have to try harder. Maybe we made a mistake. None of those thoughts were fully true, but they felt true in the quiet. Marriage under quiet pressure feels exactly like standing inside during a snowstorm. From the outside, the house looks peaceful.
From the inside, you hear the wind hitting the walls.
The next morning, we went to work as usual. Emails, meetings, deadlines. We performed our professional roles flawlessly. No one could see the emotional distance forming at home. This is how many marriages weaken, not through betrayal, but through accumulation. Small misunderstandings stacked like snow. There is a well-known concept in relationship psychology called the negative sentiment override. It happens when partners start interpreting neutral actions as negative because unresolved tension colors everything. A simple sigh becomes criticism. A short response becomes rejection. I noticed it happening. If my partner came home tired and quiet, I assumed they were upset with me. If I forgot a small detail, I assumed I had disappointed them deeply. We were no longer responding to the present moment. We were reacting to accumulated stress. And beneath all of that, my unhealed past still existed. Remember the snowstorm that made me ask, when did you last forgive?
Yet forgiven some things.
But not all. Old insecurities were still active. So when conflict appeared in my marriage, it triggered memories of past abandonment and failure. I was not only arguing with my partner, I was arguing with history.
One night, After another tense conversation, he sat alone in the living room. Outside, winter air pressed against the windows again. Not a dramatic storm.
Just cold. I realized something uncomfortable but necessary. I had been expecting my partner to heal wounds they did not cause.
He wanted reassurance strong enough to erase all scar.
That is too much to ask of any human. Marriage is not a therapy session. It is a partnership. The next day, instead of pretending everything was fine, I chose a different approach. I said slowly and carefully, I think I am reacting to my past, not to you. It was one of the hardest sentences I had spoken in English, but it shifted the conversation completely.
My partner listened.
Not defensively, not impatiently, just quietly. And then they said something equally honest. I feel pressure too. I am afraid of failing us. That was the first time we named the real enemy. Not each other. Fear. When couples identify fear instead of blaming each other, the dynamic changes. Research in emotionally focused therapy shows that vulnerability strengthens connection more than criticism ever could. Marriage under quiet pressure can survive if both people are willing to speak gently and listen bravely. We were not perfect after that conversation. We still disagreed. We still miscommunicated sometimes. But we began to pause before reacting. We began asking, what are you really feeling? Instead of why did you do that? And slowly, the snow on the roof felt lighter. If you are watching this real English story practice and struggling in your relationship while also struggling with English, know this, the two journeys influence each other. When you learn to express feelings clearly, even in simple language, you protect your connection. You do not need advanced vocabulary to save a marriage.
You need courage to say, I am scared.
You need humility to say, I was wrong. You need patience to say, let's try again. Quiet pressure can either crack a foundation or strengthen it. It depends on whether you stay silent or choose to speak. The storm that locked us inside. The weather alert came 3 days in advance.
Severe winter storm warning.
Grocery stores filled quickly. People stocked up on water, batteries, bread. In America, storms are not just romantic background scenes. They are logistical events. You prepare or you suffer. We prepared like everyone else. We charged our phones. We bought extra food. We filled the car with gas, even though we knew we would not be driving anywhere. On the surface, we were responsible adults handling a predictable winter event. Inside our marriage, however, something less predictable was building. When the snow finally started falling, it did not look dramatic at first. Soft flakes, slow movement, peaceful. By evening, the wind strengthened. By night, Visibility disappeared. The world outside our apartment turned white and silent. The next morning, we woke up officially trapped. Roads were closed. Offices announced remote work.
Public transportation shut down.
The city felt paused. No errands.
No social plan.
No excuses to leave the house. It was just us. There is a psychological phenomenon called forced proximity effect. When two people are placed in close quarters without distraction, unresolved tension surfaces faster. Usually, daily routines dilute conflict. Work, traffic, emails, they create distance. But remove all of that, and whatever remains between two people becomes impossible to ignore. The storm locked us inside physically. It also locked us inside emotionally. At first, we tried to keep things light. We made coffee. We watched the news. We joked about being snowed in. But beneath the surface, the quiet pressure from the previous weeks was still there. By afternoon, cabin fever began to appear.
Small irritation felt bigger.
The apartment seemed smaller. The silence between conversations stretched longer. I noticed my thoughts becoming restless.
What if this tension never goes away? What if we are slowly drifting apart? Fear is creative.
It builds stories quickly. Snow continued piling against the windows. The world outside was unreachable. Then something subtle happened.
The power flickered.
Just once. But enough to create that familiar jolt of uncertainty. The lights dimmed for a second and returned. My heart reacted faster than logic. I suddenly felt the same emotional wave I experienced during the historic storm earlier in the year. Storms have a way of activating old memories. The brain associates present stress with past pain. It is a survival mechanism. If something feels threatening, even symbolically, your nervous system prepares for danger. I realized that the storm outside was not my real discomfort. The real discomfort was the emotional distance that had grown quietly between us. We were sitting in the living room, both scrolling on our phones, pretending to be relaxed.
The wind hit the windows sharply.
The sound felt louder than it should have.
I put my phone down first.
This feels strange, I said. My partner looked up.
The storm.
No, I answered slowly. Us. Silence followed.
Not angry silence. Just careful silence.
Here's what I learned about difficult conversations. They rarely start dramatically. They start awkwardly. With incomplete sentences. With vulnerability that feels risky. I think we've both been stressed, I continued. And I don't want this storm to pass and nothing changes. The snow outside kept falling. Inside, something else began to shift.
My partner exhaled deeply.
I feel it too, they admitted. I've been afraid to bring it up. Fear again. The same invisible force that had shaped our arguments now revealed itself openly. There is research in relationship science showing that couples who name their shared stressors instead of blaming each other are more likely to strengthen their bond. When you say, "We are facing pressure," instead of "You are the problem," the dynamic changes from opposition to partnership. The storm removed distractions. It forced us to sit with discomfort. We started talking, slowly, imperfectly.
No dramatic speech.
Just honest sentences. I feel overwhelmed at work. I worry I am not doing enough. I am scared of repeating old patterns. Each sentence felt like clearing snow from a blocked doorway. At one point, I said something I had avoided for months. Sometimes I react strongly because of my past, not because of what you did. It was not easy to admit, but it was true. The storm had created a container.
A pause in normal life.
A space where we could not escape into busyness. Outside, emergency vehicles occasionally passed, their lights reflecting off the snow. Inside, we were facing an emergency of a different kind, not catastrophic, but critical. The longer we talked, the calmer I felt. My body relaxed. My breathing slowed. This is not poetic exaggeration. Neuroscience supports this experience. When we express vulnerable emotions and feel heard, the brain releases oxytocin, a hormone linked to bonding and trust. The stress response decreases. By evening, the storm was still strong. But inside our home, the atmosphere had changed. We cooked dinner together. Not because everything was magically fixed, but because something had softened. Snowstorms in America disrupt schedules. They force communities to slow down. Sometimes they reveal weaknesses in infrastructure. Sometimes they reveal strength. That night, locked inside by weather we could not control, we discovered that our marriage was not fragile. It was strained, yes, but strain is not the same as breaking. The storm that trapped us physically also freed us emotionally. If you are listening to this real English story practice, notice the simplicity of the sentences. Difficult emotions do not require complicated vocabulary. They require courage. The snow outside eventually stopped. But the conversation inside did not. And that was the real turning point. Facing the past out loud. There is a specific kind of silence that feels heavier than shouting. It is the silence right before you say something you have avoided for years. The night of the storm, when snow pressed thick against our windows and the world outside disappeared into white, I realized I had reached that silence. Not just in my marriage. In myself. You can survive in a second language for a long time without ever speaking your deepest truth. You can talk about work. about groceries, about weather forecasts. You can even talk about love. But trauma, regret, shame, those require a different kind of vocabulary. That night, sitting across from my partner in our dimly lit living room, I understood that if I did not speak now, I would keep carrying the past like frozen weight. "I need to tell you something," I said. My voice was steady, but my chest felt tight. There is an important psychological concept called emotional exposure. When we deliberately speak about painful memories instead of suppressing them, the brain slowly reduces their intensity over time. It is not magic. It is repetition. Each time you tell the story safely, your nervous system learns that remembering is not the same as reliving. But knowing this theory is very different from doing it. I had avoided talking about certain parts of my past for years. Previous relationships that ended abruptly. Professional failures that damaged my confidence. Moments when I felt rejected and internalized it as proof of inadequacy. When I moved to the United States, I told myself I was starting fresh. New country, new job, new marriage. But geography does not erase memory. And now, trapped inside by the snowstorm, there was nowhere left to hide. "I am not always reacting to you," I began slowly. "Sometimes I am reacting to old pain." The words felt fragile in English. In my native language, I could have explained the nuances more easily. I could have used poetic expressions. But here, in simple American English, I had to be direct. "I was hurt before," I continued, "and I never fully healed." Saying that out loud changed something physical inside me. My shoulders lowered. My breathing deepened. There is solid research in effective neuroscience showing that labeling emotions, simply naming them, reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. In simple terms, when you say, "I am afraid," your brain becomes less afraid. Language organizes chaos. My partner did not interrupt. They did not try to fix me. They just listened. Encouraged by their silence, I went further. "I think I expect you to protect me from pain that happened before we met," I admitted. "And that is not fair." That sentence was not rehearsed. It arrived in real time. Forgiveness, I was beginning to understand, is not only about forgiving other people. It is also about forgiving the version of yourself who did not know better at the time. For years, I had secretly blamed myself for past failures. I replayed conversations and imagined better responses. I questioned my worth. I carried subtle guilt for staying too long in situations that hurt me. During that snow-filled night, I saw clearly that holding on to that self-blame was affecting my marriage in the present. "When did you last forgive?" the storm had asked me. Now I understood the deeper layer of that question.
A die vorgiven mezelf?
Self-forgiveness is often misunderstood. It does not mean ignoring mistakes. It means acknowledging them, learning from them, and releasing the endless punishment. Research in positive psychology shows that people who practice self-forgiveness experience lower anxiety and stronger relationship satisfaction. Why? Because they stop projecting unhealed shame onto others. As I spoke, I noticed something powerful. My English did not need to be perfect. My grammar did not need to be advanced. My accent did not need to disappear.
The emotional truth carries the meaning.
I was scared, I said. I felt alone. I didn't know how to ask for help. Short sentences.
Et vis content.
My partner finally responded. Thank you for telling me, they said quietly. I don't want to fight your past. I want to understand it. That sentence felt like warmth in a frozen room. The storm outside intensified briefly. Wind howled.
Snow hit the glass.
But inside, something settled. Facing the past out loud is different from thinking about it privately.
When you think alone, your mind can distort memory.
When you speak them to someone safe, the story stabilizes. It becomes less dramatic, less monstrous. I realized that for years, I had feared vulnerability because I thought it would make me weak, especially in a second language. But vulnerability is clarity. It removes guessing. It removes silent resentment. Living and working in America had already forced me to confront professional insecurities. Marriage had exposed relational insecurities. Now the storm demanded emotional honesty. And honesty, I discovered, is the foundation of real fluency, not just in language but in life. If you are practicing English through this story, notice how emotional expression does not require complicated structures. The most transformative conversations are often built on simple sentences spoken sincerely. I am hurting. I need support.
I forgive myself.
That night, after we finished talking, we did not feel magically perfect. There were still things to work through. Healing is gradual. But something fundamental had shifted. The past no longer felt like a secret enemy hiding behind every disagreement. It had been named. And once something is named, it loses its power to control you silently. The snowstorm had locked us inside. But speaking the truth unlocked something deeper. And I was finally beginning to understand what real forgiveness required.
Small daily English ritual.
Healing does not usually arrive like lightning. It arrives like routine. After the storm that locked us inside and the night I finally faced my past out loud, I expected to wake up transformed. Calm. Confident. Completely free. Instead, I woke up human. Still sensitive.
Still imperfect. Still learning.
That is when I understood something essential. Breakthroughs are dramatic, but growth is repetitive. Living and working in the United States had already taught me discipline. Show up.
Meet deadline.
Pay bills. Adapt. But emotional healing and language learning require something quieter.
Small daily ritual. The morning after hors deep conversation, snow stick over the streets.
The city was silent, almost reflective. I made coffee and opened my notebook. Not a productivity planner. Not a goal tracker.
Just a simple notebook for English practice.
At the top of the page, I wrote one sentence. Today I choose peace. It was not poetic. It was not complex. But writing it slowly forced me to feel it. There is strong evidence in cognitive psychology that writing by hand strengthens memory and emotional processing. When you write, you engage more areas of the brain than when you type.
It slows you down.
And slowing down, I realized, was exactly what my nervous system needed. So I created a ritual. Every morning, I wrote 3 simple sentences in English. I feel. I need. I will. For example, I feel hopeful.
I need patience.
I will speak honestly. This was not just language practice. It was emotional calibration. When you live in a second language, especially in a fast-paced American environment, it is easy to operate on autopilot. Emails, meetings, notifications, deadlines. Your brain becomes reactive. But intentional language creates intentional living. Research in behavioral neuroscience shows that small repeated actions build neural pathways more effectively than occasional intense effort. This applies to fitness. It applies to skill development. And it applies to emotional resilience. So instead of waiting for another storm to force reflection, I built reflection into ordinary days. After work, I practiced slow speaking. I would tell my partner about my day using simple, clear sentences. Today was challenging. I felt nervous in the meeting.
Yandel did better than last time.
Notice the pattern. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Just honest. Something interesting happened over time. My confidence in English improved, but so did my emotional regulation. Because when you practice describing feelings regularly, you reduce their power to overwhelm you. Naming emotions creates distance between you and the reaction. Instead of I am angry, it becomes I notice anger. That small shift changes behavior. We also introduced a weekly ritual into our marriage. Every Sunday evening, we asked each other 2 questions. What went well this week? What felt heavy?
No accusation.
No cross-examinations.
Just listening.
In American culture, Especially in high-performance environments, people often focus on achievements.
Promotion.
Projects. Progress. But sustainable relationships focus on emotional weather, not just external results. Sometimes my answer was simple. What went well? I asked a question in a meeting without overthinking. What felt heavy? I doubted myself afterward. Other weeks, my partner shared their own stress about work expectations or financial pressure. By naming stress early, we prevented it from hardening into resentment. There is a well-known principle in psychology: what you monitor, you can manage. When you track habits, they improve. When you track emotions, they stabilize. These rituals were not glamorous. They would not go viral on social media, but they quietly strengthened our foundation. And something surprising happened. Forgiveness became easier. Not because the past disappeared, but because the present felt more stable. Forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is a maintenance practice. Just like language. If you stop speaking English for months, fluency fades. If you stop practicing empathy, connection weakens. If you stop choosing understanding, resentment rebuilds. Living in the United States had once felt overwhelming. New systems, new expectations, new cultural codes. But daily rituals created familiarity inside uncertainty. I began noticing improvement in unexpected places. In meetings, I paused before responding instead of rushing to prove myself. In arguments, I breathed before defending. In moments of insecurity, I repeated quietly, I am learning. Neuroscientists explain that repetition builds myelination, the strengthening of neural pathways. The more you practice a behavior, the more automatic it becomes. Calm can become a habit. So can honesty. One evening, weeks after the storm, I walked outside as light snow fell again. This time, I did not associate snow with fear or tension.
Y associait-il itouise réflexion.
With growth. The question from the storm still echoed occasionally, when did you last forgive? But now, the answer was ongoing.
I forgive myself when I make mistake at work.
I forgive my partner when stress makes us sharp. I forgive the past when it tries to define me. Small sentences. Repeated often. If you are watching this real English story practice and wondering how to improve both your language and your life, here is the secret that is not dramatic enough for headlines. Build rituals. 5 minutes of slow reading. 3 sentences of honest writing.
1 vulnérable conversation per week.
That is how storms lose their power. Not through force. Through consistency. And consistency, I learned, is warmer than any winter coat.
The night I almost left.
There is a version of this story where I quietly pack a suitcase.
No dramatic fight. Nos broken plates.
Just silence heavy enough to crush oxygen. It was late winter in the United States, months after the snowstorm that forced us to confront everything. The streets were clear now. Life had resumed its American pace. Meetings, emails, grocery runs, tax documents, performance reviews. On the outside, we looked stable. On the inside, I was tired. Healing is not linear. Growth does not move in a straight line. And marriage, especially while building a life in a foreign country, tests every hidden insecurity you carry. That week had been brutal at work.
A major project présentation.
Fast English discussions. Subtle cultural cues I was still decoding. I smiled. I performed. I contributed. But by the time I came home each night, I felt like my brain had run a marathon. In the United States, professional culture values clarity and confidence.
If you hesitate, someone else fills the space.
If you understate your value, you risk being overlooked. For someone who grew up equating humility with safety, this was exhausting. One evening, after another tense conversation about finances and future plans, something inside me shut down. Not anger. Not sadness.
Just numbness. I remember standing in our bedroom, staring at the closet. I imagined folding clothes.
Booking a flight. Starting over alone.
It shocked me how calm the fantasy felt.
That is the dangerous part of emotional distance. It feels peaceful before it becomes permanent. I did not want to leave because I stopped loving my partner. I wanted to leave because I felt inadequate. Because old wounds whispered, "You are too much effort."
Too complicated. Too émotionnel.
Moving to America had amplified that voice. Every misunderstanding felt like proof of my flaws. Every argument felt like confirmation that maybe I was not built for this level of pressure. There is research in relationship psychology showing that stress from external environments, work, relocation, cultural adjustment, often disguises itself as relational conflict. You think the problem is your partner. Sometimes the problem is unprocessed stress. That night, I almost let stress make the decision. Instead of packing, I sat on the edge of the bed. My partner walked in and saw my expression.
No accusation. No interrogation.
Just one question.
Are you here with me right now? It sounds simple.
But it pierced through the fog. Was I physically present? Yes. Emotionally? Not really. I had retreated into survival mode. This is something many immigrants and expats experience but rarely articulate. When you operate in a second language all day, managing tone, grammar, and cultural context, you spend enormous cognitive energy. By the time you come home, you may have nothing left for emotional nuance. And if both partners are tired?
Small misunderstanding growth.
I answered honestly, I don't know. That honesty changed everything. Because honesty interrupts silent exits. We talked, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. I admitted that sometimes I felt like I was failing both at work and at home. That the pressure to succeed in the United States made me hypersensitive to criticism. That I feared disappointing everyone. My partner admitted feeling helpless, unsure how to support me without feeling pushed away. There was no villain in the room. Only two exhausted people carrying invisible loads. According to attachment theory, when people feel overwhelmed, they tend to react in predictable ways, pursue, withdraw, or defend. I had chosen withdrawal. Not because I did not care, but because I cared too much and feared inadequacy. That night, instead of escalating, we slowed down. We did something we had not done in weeks.
We held on without talking. Physical reassurance before verbal solution.
Neuroscience shows that safe physical touch reduces cortisol, the stress hormone, and increases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. In simple words, safety first, strategy second. After a long silence, I said something that scared me. I don't want to leave. I just don't want to feel like I'm drowning. And there it was.
The real sentence.
Not you make me unhappy. Not this isn't working. But I'm overwhelmed.
When you label the real emotion, the conflict shift.
Instead of debating who was right, we discussed practical adjustments. Lighter expectations during high-stress work weeks.
Clarity.
More patience when language fatigue showed up. Because yes, language fatigue is real. If you are building a career in America as a non-native English speaker, you are not just learning vocabulary. You are constantly translating identity,
Humor,
authority, vulnerability. That translation is invisible to most people. But it costs energy. The night I almost left became the night I chose to stay, with awareness. Forgiveness played a role again. Not dramatic forgiveness for a betrayal, but quiet forgiveness for human limits.
I forgave myself for not being endlessly strong. I forgave my partner for not reading my mind. I forgave the situation for being hard.
And something subtle shifted. Leaving would have been easier in the short term. Staying required communication, humility, and repeated effort. But staying also meant growth. Weeks later, during another stressful project cycle, I noticed something different. Instead of withdrawing, I said early, "This week is heavy for me." That one sentence prevented escalation. When did I last forgive? That night. When I forgave the version of myself who wanted to escape. If you are watching this real English story practice and feeling your own silent suitcase moment, pause before you pack. Ask yourself, is it love that is broken, or is it stress that is loud? Sometimes the storm is not outside. It is inside your nervous system. And sometimes healing is not dramatic reconciliation. It is choosing to stay present when leaving feels tempting. That night, I stayed. Not perfectly. Not heroically. Just honestly. And honesty, I am learning, is stronger than escape.
Redefining success in America.
For a long time, I believed success in the United States had a very specific shape. A higher salary. A confident voice in meetings. A growing savings account. A marriage that looked stable from the outside. If those boxes were checked, I thought I was doing well. But after the snowstorm, after the night I almost left, after months of small English rituals and honest conversations, I began to question something deeper. What if success is not achievement, but alignment? Living and working in America can quietly train you to measure yourself constantly. Performance reviews, credit scores, LinkedIn updates, productivity metrics. Even social gatherings can feel like subtle comparisons of progress. For immigrants or international professionals, that pressure doubles. You are not just building a career. You are proving that your move was worth it. That the sacrifice meant something. I carried that invisible scoreboard everywhere. If I struggled in a meeting, I replayed it for hours. If my partner seemed distant, I assumed I had failed. If I felt tired, I judged myself for being weak. But something shifted the morning I realized I had not thought about leaving in weeks. Not because everything was perfect, but because I felt steadier. That steadiness forced a new question. What if success is emotional stability in the middle of uncertainty? Psychologists talk about internal locus of control. The belief that your responses matter more than external circumstances. You cannot control every storm, but you can control your reaction. In the early years of living in the United States, I focused entirely on external adaptation, improve my English, understand workplace culture, manage finances, plan for the future.
All important.
But I neglected internal adaptation, regulate stress, communicate vulnerability, forgive myself quickly. One afternoon, during a quarterly review at work, something surprising happened. My manager gave feedback, constructive, direct, very American in style. In the past, I would have smiled politely and then privately spiraled. This time, I took notes calmly. I asked one clarifying question. And afterward, instead of attacking myself internally, I said quietly, "This is information, not identity." That sentence changed my nervous system. Information helps you grow. Identity attacks make you shrink. There is research in cognitive behavioral psychology showing that reframing interpretation reduces anxiety significantly. The event does not change.
The meaning does.
Later that evening, I told my partner about the feedback. Not defensively. Not dramatically. Just clearly. I received useful feedback today. I can improve in this area. That was it.
Nos émotional collapse. Nos silent resentment. Nos fantasies of escape.
And in that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer fighting America. I was integrating into it.
Not by losing myself,
but by strengthening myself. Marriage changed too. Instead of asking, "Are we impressive?" we started asking, "Are we honest?" Instead of chasing visible milestones, we focused on invisible ones. Did we listen this week? Did we repair quickly after tension? Did we respect each other's exhaustion? Success began to feel quieter. There is a cultural myth, especially amplified through social media, that life in the United States must look extraordinary to be meaningful. Big houses. Big titles.
Big declaration of love.
But sustainable happiness often looks ordinary. Cooking dinner together after a long day. Laughing at pronunciation mistakes without shame. Saying, "I'm overwhelmed" before it becomes an explosion. One snowy afternoon, yes, snow again but softer this time, I walked outside alone. The air was cold but gentle. I remembered the first storm that forced us into confrontation.
I remember the night I almost paquet da suite case.
And I noticed something new. I no longer feared storms. Not literal ones.
Not emotional ones.
Because I had evidence now. Evidence that discomfort does not automatically mean destruction. That conflict does not automatically mean failure. That pressure does not automatically mean collapse. Resilience is built through survived moments. If you are watching this real English story practice to improve your listening skills, here is something subtle to notice in your own life. Pay attention to how you define success. Is it external validation? Is it financial comparison? Is it flawless communication? Or is it the ability to stay present when discomfort appears? My English is still improving. My career is still developing. My marriage is still evolving. Nothing is finished. But I measure progress differently now. When I pause before reacting, that is success. When I express fear without shame, that is success. When I forgive faster than before, that is success. There is a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself through repeated experience. Every calm response strengthens a pathway.
Every honest conversation renforce safety.
You are not just building a career in America. You are building a nervous system capable of handling it. And maybe that is the deeper American dream, not perfection, but possibility. Possibility to grow. Possibility to repair.
Possibility to redefine yourself without abandoning who you were.
When did I last forgive? Today. For not being extraordinary.
For being human.
For needing time. If you are navigating love, work, language and identity all at once, remember this: success is not how impressive your life looks during a storm. Success is whether you stay connected to yourself and to the person beside you when the wind starts rising. And I finally understand that staying connected is the real achievement. The conversation I avoided for years. There was one conversation I kept postponing.
Not with my partner.
Not with my boss. Not even with America. With my parents. For years, I told myself I would call when things were more stable. When my English felt flawless. When my career looked impressive. When my marriage felt undeniably strong. In other words, when I could present success. But healing does not wait for perfection. And neither does time. Living in the United States had changed me in ways my family could not fully see. They saw photos, holiday messages, occasional video calls. They heard, "I'm good. Work is busy." They saw snow in the background and assumed adventure. They did not see the snowstorm arguments.
The night he almost left.
The quiet rituals of rebuilding. Part of me was still that younger version who believed love had to be earned through achievement. So even across oceans, I performed strength. But something shifted after redefining success for myself. If success was alignment and honesty, then hiding struggle was misalignment. One Sunday afternoon, after our weekly check-in ritual, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. My partner looked at me and asked gently, "Are you ready?" I nodded, but my stomach tightened. This was not about blame. My parents were not villains in my story. They were hard-working, protective, imperfect humans who did their best. But like many families, emotional vulnerability was not our default language. We spoke about responsibility,
sacrifice,
education, not fear. Not self-doubt. Not marital tension.
I protocol.
At first, it was normal. Health updates. Weather comparisons. Practical questions about work. Then there was a pause. I could have ended the call there. Instead, I said something I had never said before. Living here has been harder than I expected. Silence. Not angry silence. Just unfamiliar. When you change family patterns, the first reaction is often confusion. Psychologists call this system disruption. Families operate on unspoken roles. When one member shifts, the system recalibrates. My mother asked softly, "Hard in what way?" I chose simple English, not because they needed it, but because I needed clarity. Sometimes I feel pressure to prove myself. At work. In marriage.
In everything.
My father cleared his throat. We never wanted you to feel pressure from us. And there it was, the misunderstanding. Pressure does not always come from explicit demands. Sometimes it grows from expectations we internalize as children. The desire to honor sacrifice. To justify opportunity. Moving to America felt like carrying the family story forward. But I had never said how heavy that responsibility sometimes felt. So I said it. I wanted to make you proud. But sometimes I forgot to take care of myself. There are moments when vulnerability feels like stepping into cold water. You brace for shock. Instead, I heard something unexpected. We are already proud, my mother said. Not because you are in America. Because you are trying. Trying. Not winning. Not perfect. Trying. Tears surprised me. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet release. Forgiveness appeared again, but in a new direction. I forgave them for expectations they never clearly imposed. I forgave myself for carrying imaginary standards. I forgave the younger version of me who equated love with achievement. The conversation did not solve everything. We did not unpack every childhood memory. But something fundamental shifted. Honesty entered the space. After that call, I felt lighter in a way I did not expect. As if a silent contract had dissolved. In marriage, too, something softened. Because when you stop projecting unresolved family pressure onto your partner, conflict changes shape. Sometimes we argue not about dishes or finances, but about old fears wearing new clothes. Fear of not being enough. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of repeating past patterns. By naming where some of those fears began, I reduced their power in the present. There is research in intergenerational psychology showing that awareness interrupts unconscious repetition.
When you understand a pattern, you gain choice.
Later that evening, I told my partner, I feel like I just set down a backpack I've been carrying for years. They smiled and said, I noticed. That was the quiet reward of courage, not applause, but relief. If you are watching this real English story practice to improve your listening and emotional vocabulary, pay attention to this phrase. I wanted to make you proud. How many decisions in your life are guided by that sentence? There is nothing wrong with honoring your family. But when honor becomes pressure, and pressure becomes silence, connection suffers. Living in the United States taught me independence. Marriage taught me partnership. But that phone call taught me integration. I do not have to choose between loyalty and honesty. I do not have to perform success to deserve love. I do not have to hide struggle to maintain respect. When did I last forgive? On that phone call.
I forgave my past for being imperfect.
I forgave my family story for being incomplete. I forgave myself for growing differently than expected. Snow still falls here every winter. Work remains demanding. Marriage still requires attention. But something foundational feels steadier now. Because healing is not only about romantic love. It is about rewriting the internal narrative you carry across continents. And sometimes, the bravest journey is not moving to a new country. It is calling home and telling the truth. The snowstorm didn't change my life, I did. If you had told me a year ago that a snowstorm in the United States would become a turning point in my marriage, my identity, and my emotional healing, I would have laughed. Storms are weather. They pass. They melt. But this one didn't just cover streets. It uncovered truths. Looking back now, I realize something important. The snowstorm did not heal my past. It revealed what was still unhealed. And that revelation changed everything. When the roads closed and the noise of daily American life paused, no commuting, no meetings, no errands, I had nowhere to hide. Not behind work. Not behind productivity. Not behind I'm busy. For the first time in a long time, I sat still long enough to hear my own thoughts clearly. Living and working in the United States had trained me to move fast, adapt quickly, perform confidently, deliver results. And in many ways, that environment made me stronger. My English improved. My career grew. My independence expanded. But strength without self-awareness becomes tension. That storm forced me to confront three truths. I was carrying old pressure from my family. I was translating stress into marital conflict. I was defining success too narrowly. None of those realizations were dramatic. They were quiet, uncomfortable acknowledgments. Healing did not arrive in a single conversation. It unfolded through small daily English writing rituals, honest Sunday check-ins, the night I chose to stay instead of leave, the phone call where I stopped performing success. Each moment added a layer of stability. And here is what I understand now. Forgiveness is not a grand gesture. It is maintenance. You forgive in the morning when you wake up tired. You forgive in the afternoon when feedback stings. You forgive at night when your partner misunderstands you. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is refusing to let yesterday control today. There is a concept in psychology called emotional integration. It means your past experiences remain part of you, but they no longer dominate you. They inform you without imprisoning you. That is what changed. The snowstorm did not erase my insecurity. It gave me space to see it. America did not fix my marriage. It challenged it. Marriage did not heal my childhood patterns. It exposed them. And exposure is not destruction. It is opportunity. If you are watching this real English story practice, maybe you came for language learning. Maybe you wanted listening practice with real-life vocabulary. Maybe you searched for how to improve English naturally in 2026. But maybe you also needed this reminder. Your life does not have to look perfect to be progressing. In the United States, success is often marketed as visibility.
Big milestone.
Clear wins. Public achievements. But the most important transformations are invisible. The moment you pause before reacting. The moment you say, "I'm overwhelmed," instead of withdrawing. The moment you call home and tell the truth. The moment you redefine success privately. Those moments rarely get applause. But they change trajectories.
Today, Snowstorm every winter.
Work is still demanding. My English is still evolving. My marriage still requires intention. Nothing became magically easy. But something became grounded. When tension appears now, I no longer panic. I ask, what is this teaching me? When insecurity whispers, I respond, I am learning. When conflict rises, I remember, repair is possible. And that question from the very beginning still echoes.
When did you last forgive? Not your partner. Not your parent.
Not your colleagues. You. When did you last forgive yourself for not being further ahead? For still learning? For struggling in a second language? For feeling overwhelmed while building a life abroad? Forgiveness is not weakness. It is emotional maturity. Research in neuroscience shows that chronic self-criticism activates the same stress pathways as external threat. Your body does not distinguish between being attacked by someone else and being attacked by your own thoughts. But self-compassion lowers stress responses. It creates safety internally. And safety is the foundation of growth. The snowstorm did not heal my past. But it interrupted my momentum long enough for me to choose differently. I chose to communicate instead of withdraw. I chose to stay instead of escape. I chose to redefine success.
I chose to forgive.
Healing is not an event. It is a direction. If you are navigating love, career, language, identity, and pressure all at once, especially here in the United States, know this. You are allowed to grow slowly. You are allowed to redefine success. You are allowed to forgive yourself repeatedly. And maybe the real question is not, did the snowstorm heal my past? Maybe the better question is, am I willing to face what the storm reveals? Because storms will come again. Work pressure. Cultural misunderstandings.
Family expectation. Marital tension.
But now I know something I didn't know before. I am not afraid of storms anymore. Not because they stopped, but because I learned how to stand in them. And that is the quiet kind of strength no one can see, but you can feel. If this story resonated with you, carry this question into your own life tonight. When did you last forgive? Your answer might change everything. Here's the truth I didn't expect to say at the beginning of this journey. The snowstorm was never the main character. I was. The storm didn't knock on my door to fix my marriage. It didn't land in America to teach me emotional vocabulary. It didn't freeze the streets so I could redefine success. It simply paused my distractions. And in that pause, I finally heard myself. If you've watched this entire Real English Story Practice series, you followed more than a relationship story. You followed the quiet evolution of a person learning how to live, love, and work in the United States without abandoning their inner world. You've seen the tension of building a life in a second language, the pressure of proving yourself in American work culture, the fragile moments inside marriage when silence feels safer than honesty, the heavy expectations carried from family across oceans.
The night I almost left.
The morning I chose to stay. But here's the part that should make you curious. This wasn't the hardest storm. It was just the first one I faced consciously. Because once you learn to recognize emotional weather patterns, you start seeing them everywhere. In your reactions.
In your trigger.
In the way you interpret feedback. In the way you hear your partner's tone.
The difference now?
I don't run. And that changes everything. Living and working in the United States will continue to stretch me. The pace is fast. The expectations are high. The comparison culture is loud. Success here is visible, measurable, and often public. But growth? Growth is invisible. Growth happens when you pause before defending yourself. Growth happens when you say, I'm overwhelmed, instead of shutting down. Growth happens when you forgive faster than you used to. And here's the part most people don't talk about. Forgiveness is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of emotional freedom.
When you forgive, you release the identity built around all pain.
You stop narrating your life through past wounds. You create space for a new version of yourself, one that responds instead of reacts. So let me ask you one more time, not as a dramatic question, but as a quiet invitation. When did you last forgive? Not for something catastrophic, but for something small. For not being fluent enough. For not being confident enough. For arguing when you were tired. For feeling homesick. For needing reassurance. The snowstorm didn't heal my past. It revealed that I was ready to. And that readiness, that willingness to look inward instead of outward, is what transformed my marriage, my mindset, and my experience of America. But here's the twist. There is another storm coming. Not necessarily weather. Life. Another challenge at work.
Another misunderstanding in love.
Another unexpected test of identity. The real question isn't whether storms will come. The real question is, who will you be when they do? Will you withdraw? Will you perform strength? Will you pack the suitcase emotionally before speaking honestly? Or will you pause, breathe, and stay? If this story resonated with you, if you're building a life in the United States, improving your English through real emotional storytelling, navigating marriage, pressure, growth, and identity, then this channel is for you. Because this isn't just about language learning. It's about learning yourself. On this channel, we explore a real English through real life, emotional vocabulary through authentic experiences, a marriage, growth, and resilience in modern American culture. How to improve English naturally while healing internally. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching casually. You're reflecting. And that means you're growing. So here's your next step. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Like this video if it made you pause and think. And in the comments, answer this honestly.
When did you last forgive? Not the answer you think sounds strong.
The real one. Your response might help someone else who is silently standing in their own storm right now. Because healing spreads quietly. And sometimes, the most powerful English sentence you can say is simple. I'm still learning. The next story will go deeper.
And I promise you.
The next storm will reveal even more.